The Emperor is mad. Long live the Emperor. Insanity is a disease of commoners. Royalty by definition does not go insane. Insanity is a deviation from the norm, and the Emperor can never do so because he is the standard by which all things are measured, and his people shall follow him wherever he goes, even into the pits of madness. Emperor Saif XII, the shining sword of Nera, the brightest star of the imperial house for generations. He ascended the throne in his 20th year, after his father Idris VI passed over 17 of his brothers to make him crown prince, just before he died at the age of 107. Idris had over 40 children. 5 of his sons died in mysterious circumstances. He wanted to make sure, absolutely sure, that the 100,000 planets of the eternal galactic empire were left in safe hands. The fate of 500 trillion human beings rested on Saif's shoulders, and when he ascended to the imperial throne on Nera, the galaxy held its breath. The early years were a time of upheaval. As Idris had aged, and the problem of succession had consumed him, affairs of state had been neglected. Courtiers had accrued more power than they should have been allowed. Corruption had spread unchecked, and vital areas of the government had been left to decay. Saif cut through the rot like a fiery, vengeful sword. 1,000 ministers were executed in his first year alone, and 100,000 more banished for their malfeasances. All across Nera, courtiers and bureaucrats rushed to get rid of their ill-gotten gains, and redoubled their efforts to bring order and harmony to the Emperor's realm. Old Idris had chosen well, the people said. Few spared a thought for his 17 brothers and their families, imprisoned for the rest of their lives in the old harem of the palace. There were worse fates. Like those of his sister, Yasmina, who encouraged her husband and his planet to rebel against imperial authority when the long-ignored demands for tithes were finally pressed home, perhaps thinking that her kinship with the Emperor would stay his hand. First she watched her children die, then her husband, then she herself was locked away in an oubliette and left to starve to death. Imperial blood should not be spilled, but nor should justice ever be denied. There were dozens of small rebellions in the first years of his reign. Malcontents felt confident that they could force the empire to come to terms and negotiate from a position of strength, because the imperial navy and the marines had been hollowed out by the rampant greed of Idris's final years. Admirals who commanded fleets that could not leave space dock because their fuel had been sold to the highest bidder. Marine colonels who led regiments of 10,000 men on paper and drew their salaries, who scarce had enough in practice to board a wayward freighter. Imperial commissioners appointed by Saif personally travelled the length and breadth of the galaxy, just trying to pin down what forces actually remained, and where the missing material and men had gone. It took several years to complete just the audit itself, but Saif was tireless, overseeing the commissioners' activities personally, even while he was rebuilding the civilian administration. Once the audit was finished, and cross-referenced with corruption reports in other areas, and double-checked to make sure that the commissions hadn't been corrupted themselves, then it was time to address the question of blame. Traditionally, admirals could not be executed. Traditionally, when an admiral has failed his emperor so badly that only death could settle his debt, he goes to a hangar bay on his ship and opens the outer doors. Burial in space is an honourable end, no matter what the circumstances. Many were wise enough to heed this tradition. Not all, but most. Corruption in the imperial court was eradicated. Thus it became easier to induce planetary governors to pay their tithes, because they had greater confidence their contributions would not be squandered. Thus the funding shortfall in the military eased, and the fleets rebuilt. Thus it became easier to induce planetary governors to pay their tithes, because they feared the Emperor's wrath once more, and so on and so on. With the fleets rebuilt, piracy was quashed. Trade prospered once more, and the tithes became easier to pay. Thus more was paid, and the fleets grew larger, and the trade lanes more secure, and so on and so on. In this way the realm prospered, all because one man, a divine emperor but still only a single man, had the drive and determination to bring justice to those who needed justice, and mercy to those who needed mercy, and terrible vengeance down upon those who would bring his empire to ruin. So for many years ruled Saif, 12th of his name to sit upon the nearing throne, the shining sword. This was the emperor I came to serve. As a boy I studied the histories of the Polar monastery on Talix. As a young man I studied the many facets of economic mathematics at the Nomad Academy that jumped from star to star seeking wisdom and spreading it in return. When I was 24 standard years of age and had just completed my doctorate, I was granted a post at the imperial court to tutor the emperor's daughters in the ancient arts. The royal harem was a bustling place in those days, full of concubines and scholars, and imperial children who were curious and mischievous in equal measure. We dined into the early hours of the morning, men who had been chosen for their learning, and women who had been chosen for their beauty sitting on cushions in the summer air, discussing philosophy, while the children drifted off to sleep on their laps. I have never been happier, before or since, but that is always the way with youth. When you reach a point where you are old enough to have privileges, and still young enough to have few responsibilities to go with them. That did not last. It was noticed that I was more than competent in tutoring the imperial princesses, and so I was included as a junior contributor in the curriculum of the emperor's sons. This was a different breed of education. One of them would rule the galaxy one day, and like his father Idris, the Emperor Saif was determined to ensure that they were worthy of the right. We schooled them morning, noon and night, and while they rested we studied, and we planned, and we went over their results and identified how they could be enhanced. I have never slept so little nor fretted so much, even over the Prince's Play schedules. But that is the way with youth. Even though the challenges are less important, you worry about them more. Occasionally, the Emperor would come to the harem to check on the progress of his children's education. At first, I was scarcely brave enough to speak to him, even when he asked a direct question. As time went on, I was able to give more detailed insights into his son's progress, and expound upon the materials we were teaching, and our methods. The Emperor noted that I was well versed in many disciplines, and insightful well beyond my years. The first time he asked my counsel I was shocked, but I gave it. His question was so abstract that to this day I don't know what it referred to, but my answer must have been helpful, because later he asked me another. Before long he had a question for me every time he visited, and after a while it was clear that some of his trips to the harem were solely to seek out my advice. A few more years passed, because he didn't want to deprive his sons of a competent tutor, but eventually I was removed from the harem and placed among the highest courtiers on the Imperial Council. My record from there is well documented. After 20 more years of service, in the 45th year of the reign of the Emperor Saif XII, I rose to the position of Lord Chancellor. Officially below the cadet princes, the fleet admirals, and the knights of the Imperial bodyguard in the order of precedence, but in practice second in power only to the Emperor himself. We had 25 years of prosperity together, working side by side to safeguard the order and the happiness of the Empire. All those trillions of lives in our hands, and we never faltered. I loved him like a father, and indeed I believe he came to think of me as almost a son. He gave me one of his daughters in marriage, an honour rarely bestowed upon a commoner. The Empire reached heights not seen in millennia. It was after he passed his 90th birthday that age began to slow him. Unlike his father, however, he did not relax his vigilance. More and more day-to-day matters fell to me and the rest of the council. Then even military matters were delegated to the fleet admirals, but always imperial security reported to him directly. I know that they watched even me. Saif was terrified that in his final years he would fail as his father had failed, and all that we had worked for would be devoured by the greed of lesser men. imperial justice became stricter. Transgressions that might have resulted in dismissal a decade before were now punished with imprisonment or death. But those punishments never fell unfairly, and I never believed the whispers that while the Emperor's sword was as sharp as ever, his mind was dull and showing cracks. Not until he ordered the 57th Fleet, Solari Invicta, to bombard Jeddah. Hundreds of millions dead because its governor had been embezzling imperial funds. Saif was convinced that the corruption could not be limited to one man and his cronies, that there must have been a vast conspiracy to achieve such a thorough undermining of imperial protocol. I found no evidence of such, but the evidence would have been dust under the guns of the battleships, so I hesitated. The record of the Emperor's actions these last few years is well documented. Dozens of decisions made without any rational explanation, sending the 122nd Fleet out beyond the galactic rim to chase pirates no one has ever seen, destroying Kaffa and Carthaga and Jehoshat and others, all on the merest rumour of rebellion, ordering the Night Watch Marines to sift the sands of Rakat for clues to the whereabouts of ancient Earth, more things which I do not even care to describe. Enough is enough. The Emperor is mad and we all know it, and we have become mad with him rather than admit it, carrying out orders we knew to be nonsensical or obscene. I can no longer continue this charade. I cannot lie. I cannot watch the suffering of the people, and I cannot watch the suffering of the Emperor himself, who now constantly cries out in fear of the plots and treachery he sees all around him. The reign of Saif the 12th must end. I recommend Faisal for the imperial throne. I taught him as a boy, and there was no better student among his brothers, and he has served well as the governor of Talix. Act quickly and ensure he is brought back to Nero before news of the Emperor's death spreads, and imprison his brothers the moment the accession is announced. There will be revolts, but Faisal is capable enough to restore order quickly. My colleagues on the Imperial Council, you will understand by now that this letter is a suicide note, a summation of all that was great in our Emperor, and how far we have fallen shall be all the explanation for my acts necessary. I have no ship from which to take a final walk into the void, so I leave the stage in the manner of the sages of old, with poison. I beg you spare my wife and children. They knew nothing and they're innocent. Faisal is just, and I have faith in him to protect my family, and I beseech him to continue our work to bring harmony to the galaxy. I, Caius of Talix, Imperial Lord Chancellor, ask him this in the name of his father the Emperor Saif, the 12th Saif of Nera, the Shining Sword, whom I love more than any man, and whom I killed this morning. The Emperor is dead. Long live the Emperor.